Hey, Professor! Ow! Oh! Professor!
Follow the flashlight, my young assistant.
Still no electricity? After 3 weeks?
No, I'm afraid we are still without it.
Where's Miss Whichway?
Perhaps she was fiddling with the dials of my space-time puckering machine and transported herself to another time and dimension.
Well, then how are we going to watch today's Science-O-Rama?
I have rigged up this engine with a hand crank,
A hand crank?
which you shall now grab hold with your nimble fingers and turn at a sufficient force and speed to turn on the projector.
All right, Professor.
Shore and Herschel would have been content to prove that it was possible to collect the sun's heat. In 1874, Auguste Marchand, a brilliant French engineer and the greatest of the pioneer harnessers of the sun, took a long and bold stride forward. He used concentrated reflected sun rays to generate steam in a boiler, and used that steam to operate a small engine. Marchand's apparatus, the first solar power plant, consisted of 2 principal parts, a reflector and a boiler. The reflector, a truncated copper cone lined with thin silver leaf, looked like a big lampshade, pointed skyward. It was 32 inches deep, had a diameter of 40 inches at its base, and a diameter of 120 inches at its mouth. A hand-operated mechanism made it possible to shift the reflector to follow the movement of the sun. Attached to the lower base of the reflector, its axis the same as the reflector's, was the boiler, a blackened cylinder made of copper, about 1/10 inch thick, 11 inches in diameter, and 32 inches long, enclosed by a glass cylinder 4 inches greater in diameter. The space between the boiler and its enclosing glass cylinder was filled by a 2-inch layer of hot air. Inside the boiler was another copper cylinder, somewhat smaller in diameter, only 20 inches long, and hollow except for feed and steam pipes. About 21 quarts of water could be heated between the 2 copper cylinders, and the steam chamber had a capacity of about 10 quarts. On a bright day, the sun's rays concentrated on the boiler by the reflector produced a steam pressure of 30 pounds per square inch in 40 minutes. The pressure then was raised rapidly to 75 pounds per square inch, the safety limit of the lightly constructed boiler. On a very warm day, the boiler vaporized over 5 quarts of water an hour, and the small engine it ran, driving a pump, developed 1/2 horsepower. With the financial assistance of the French government, Marchand continued his solar power experiments for 20 years. One of his later plants had a boiler made of several tubes placed side by side, which when tested over the span of a year by independent engineers, showed the excellent boiler efficiency of 49%. Some of his plants were used successfully for pumping water in Algeria. In America, John Ericsson, the Swedish-born engineer and inventor who had done his adopted country so valuable a service by designing the monitor that sank the Confederate ironclad Merrimac, was working industriously on the problem of obtaining cheap power from the sun. In 1883, he built in New York a solar power plant, his 8th, that was comparatively inexpensive and highly efficient. The reflecting apparatus consisted of a rectangular trough, 11 feet long and 16 feet broad, built of straight wood staves supported by curved iron ribs. To these staves were attached mirrors, made of common window glass, silvered on the underside. The trough, revolving around a pivot so that it could be made to follow the movement of the sun, was supported by light steel trusses, to which was attached a water heater, 6 1/4 inches in diameter and 11 feet long. The sun's rays, concentrated on the heater by the reflector, produced sufficient steam to operate an engine with a 6-inch working cylinder and an 8-inch stroke. Ericsson was 80 years old when he built this machine. Had he been younger, it is probable that he would have developed it to a very high efficiency. Other inventors continued.
I'm pooped, Professor. I can't turn that crank one more time.
Then we shall have to wait until our next meeting to continue with our solar power science-o-rama.
Well, that's one choice.
And what is the other?
You could turn the crank for a while.
Oh, my.
Waterlog Productions.